and welcome to this tutorial on Windows Communication Foundation. So this is this is a series of tutorial on WCF, and in this series of tutorial we have seen the defining of the contracts and how to implement a service, and then we also saw how to host a service using console application. Okay. So now we will, in this tutorial, I will show you about what is a app config file, okay, and how to host a service without the app config file, okay, host without app config file, okay. So few things we will be covering in this tutorial. So I will just open my demo application which we created for our previous tutorial. Project solution demo. So it's the same application. Okay, so we stopped with creating the console application and hosting the service through the console. Okay, so we had the app config file, and inside the app config file we had the endpoints configured, and then the host base address, and then the metadata is enabled. Okay, so we will see few things what we can do with these three informations. Okay, so the communication between a service and the client is through endpoints. Okay, so in the endpoint you will have a few informations. The first is the address. Okay, you have to specify where the endpoint is located in the service, and binding specifies the what kind of message, what kind of a binding you want to use, whether it is a basic HTTP binding or WS HTTP binding, or whatever binding what you want to use in your endpoint. And then contract specifies the operation to be carried. Okay, so in this binding we will clearly see about how to configure a binding and other things. Okay, but binding basically describes about how the message has to be transported, whether it has to be encoded or it has to be in a text format or binary format, and what type of transport mode should be used, whether it has to be HTTP or TCP, IPC. So all that is given in binding. Okay, and this endpoint is mainly for exposing the metadata. Okay, the description WSDL file, the web service description file which we saw. So if you want to expose the WSDL, then you have to give the metadata. Okay, so that is done using the endpoint. Okay, metadata endpoint, and you have to give the behavior HTTP get enabled equal to true. Okay, so we will see two scenarios. In case if I give this HTTP, so first I will run this application so that you will. Okay, so my service is up and running. So I have two endpoints. One is for my operation, and then the other binding is for exposing the metadata. So my metadata is available in this base address. So the link for the service util will be in this base address. So HTTP host. Okay, so can you see here the link for my metadata is here. Okay, and I have all the description here. Okay, so if I give set HTTP get enable, so if I'm going to give this condition, okay, this property as false. Okay, so we will see what happens. Okay, so since I've given this metadata, my service is not interrupted. It doesn't have anything to do with the service. Still my service is up and running. But when you see the metadata, okay, so I will go to the same URL. So the link to the service.util.exe is not enabled. Okay, so I don't have the link, so I cannot go and see the WSDL file. I cannot see the description for my service. Okay, so if you want to show the client the description of your service, then you have to give HTTP get enabled equal to true, and you have to mention a endpoint for exposing the WSDL. Okay, so this is about the metadata. And next one is uh, a service can so a service can be made up and running even without mentioning a endpoint. Okay, so if I don't give the endpoint, WCF will take the default endpoint. Okay, so I remove this endpoint. Okay, so WCF will take the default endpoint which is inside, and but it has to have a base address. Base address is compulsory. So now I run my application. So here you can see I've removed the endpoints, and then I run my application. Okay, so still my service is up and running. There is no interruption. Okay, because it has taken the default endpoint. Okay, so WCF service can run even without endpoints, but it will take the default endpoint. Okay, so now what I'm going to show you is the next one is how to do all this configuration, give the endpoint, base address, enable the HTTP, everything inside the coding, so that I will remove the app.config file. Okay, so how to host a service without the app.config file. So I have to give all the configuration in my coding part. Okay, so I have a small program here. I'll just copy this and I'll explain it to you. Okay, so I will remove my app config file. I'll just go here and I will remove all the configurations. Okay, so I've removed my configurations. So just that I have to add some namespaces. One is for the metadata behavior. Okay, so I will add the namespaces. Use system service model description. And next I have to include the namespace of my employee service. Okay, so all my errors have gone here. Okay, so I will explain how we have done this in coding. Okay, so the first is I have to give the base address. Okay, it is in URI format, and I've given the base address, and I've given an object. Okay, and then I'm giving the address for my endpoint. So this is my endpoint address. I've named it as EP address. Okay, and my binding is basic HTTP binding. Okay, and now I'm creating an instance for the host, and my service is service implementation with the base address. Okay, so this is very important. When I create a host instance, I have to mention the service and the base address. Okay, and now I have to give the once I give this, I am enabling the metadata using the service metadata behavior. And once I create the object for the service metadata behavior, I'm checking whether there is any other object. Okay, whether any other metadata has been created. If not, then I'm enabling it and I'm setting it to true. Okay, and now I'm adding this SMB to the host. Okay, so this is a syntax maybe in general. Okay, so what is necessary is your base address, and then when you create an instance for the host, you have to give the service with the base address. Okay, and now I'm enabling the metadata, and then I'm giving two endpoints. Okay, so one endpoint is for my service contract. Okay, so here I have the in this endpoint should have three data. One is your contract, so type of iService contract, and then your binding. So binding is here basic HTTP binding. Okay, and then the next one is EP address, which is your endpoint address. So this is first endpoint, and the second endpoint is my metadata endpoint. So I have given the metadata endpoint here. So I metadata exchange binding, and then a address for the metadata endpoint. So after doing all this initialization and everything, then I am opening the host, and then I'm closing the host. Okay, so file save all. And remember, I've removed all the configuration in my app config file. Okay, so I have removed all the configuration. So my host is not going to be is not going to take any information from the app config file, but it is going to refer to the program in the coding. Okay, so now I will save all, and I will put. So my service is up and running. Okay, and now what I'm more interested in my metadata. So here I've given the base address as http colon localhost service code, emp service code. Okay, yeah, there we go. So here we got the link to the metadata. So I will. Okay, so now this is my WSDL file. Okay, so all that we did in our so all that we did in our app config file, now we have done it in our coding. So what we need is a base address, and then we have the endpoints. Okay, two endpoints, and then I have enabled the metadata. Okay, the same procedure applies here. You can also remove all the endpoints, but make sure that you give the base address. So base address is compulsory. Even if you remove the endpoints, it will take the default endpoint. Okay, so thank you for watching this tutorial. I will catch you up in the next tutorial, and thank you once again.